Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Alejandra Peña Gutierrez. I'm the director of the Weisman Art Museum. Thank you for joining us tonight in this program, Imagining Future City Civic Visions. We are honored to present tonight's panel conversation in conjunction with the Weisman's exhibition, Imagining Future Cities, Global and Minnesota Visions, Past and Present, which explores the enduring pursuit of the future city, both around the world and here in Minnesota. This exhibition is the result of a years-long collaboration between the museum and McKnight Land Grant professor Dingliang Yang, along with a talented exhibition team. Thomas Fisher and Jennifer Yoos, research fellow Michael Keller, and a dedicated team of research assistants. WAM would like to thank all of our supporters, donors, and funders who make our programming possible. And thank you for being an active arts participant. This activity is also made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Sports Operating Supports Grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. If you feel inspired by today's program, please consider making a gift to WAM after the event. We are recording tonight's event, and it will be posted on the Weisman's YouTube channel soon. After the panelists' presentations, we will have a Q&A, so please raise your hand and wait for the microphone before speaking. And finally, please join us after the Q&A for a reception at the Weisman Art Museum. And now I am very pleased to welcome University of Minnesota President Rebecca Cunningham. Throughout her career, President Cunningham has focused on advancing a powerful mission to enhance the health, safety, and prosperity of communities. It's my great pleasure to welcome President Cunningham to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandra, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome. Welcome to the University of Minnesota and to the Coffman Theater. It's wonderful to get to see you all here tonight. I want to extend a special welcome to our distinguished guests, MIT Vice Provost Brent Ryan, and our very own Jennifer Yoos and Dingliang Yang from the University of Minnesota School of Architecture. Thank you all for being here tonight and for sharing your expertise with us. Tonight's panel is titled Imagine Our Future Cities, Civic Visions. When we explore dreams of future cities, what do we learn about ourselves? What a lovely way to start an evening, right? What do we learn about ourselves? It's a question that gets to the heart of what we do here at the University of Minnesota, envisioning a better future for the state of Minnesota, taking bold action on how we're going to get there with some of the greatest people, students, faculty, and staff. Looking at today's city landscape is like holding a mirror up to its people. Our buildings, our parks, our public spaces, they all reflect our identity, our values, and our aspirations. They tell a story about who we are and who we hope to be. The speakers you're going to hear from tonight are some of the best minds in urban design, public policy, and architecture. And this is one of the beautiful things about a comprehensive research university is bringing together those pieces between the disciplines for events like this. In that interdisciplinary space is really where the magic happens. These folks are not just dreamers, they're builders. They've dedicated their lives to shaping the places that we call home, addressing everything from the revitalization and transportation to climate change and equitable growth. Their work helps us understand that a city is never truly finished. It's living, breathing entity that changes and grows with us, kind of like a university, and we're glad that it gets to grow with us in that way. This conversation is a chance for us to think critically about our collective future and be inspired by those who are leading the way. With that, I'd like to invite this evening's moderator, Thomas Fisher, director of the Minnesota Design Center, to take the stage to share a few words. Thank you all so much and enjoy your evening.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Good to see everybody. We really appreciate President Cunningham's leadership. It's challenging running a university. This university, just on the Twin Cities campus, has 82,000 students, faculty, and staff. If we were a city, we would be the 6th largest city in the state. And so running a university is very much like running a city. And so the topic of this evening's event is really, I think, relevant to what it's like to be here. I think we're also really fortunate to have Alejandra as our director of the Weisman Art Museum. I chaired the committee that brought Alejandra here, and we were all really so impressed by her interest in community engagement, in connecting the university to the larger public, and to having exhibits like tonight's topic and the exhibit on future cities is the kind of thing that I think she's brought to this community. She also has an architecture degree, which is relatively unusual for an art museum director. And finally, so why we're here. The human population passed a milestone in 2010. For the first time in human history, more than half of the human population now lives in cities, and that's rapidly growing. And so we are a rapidly urbanizing species on the planet. In the US, about 85% of our population lives in metropolitan areas. So cities matter. They are where we are living, and thinking about the future of cities, we think, is one of the most important things that we can all be talking about, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. So we have a terrific panel, and I'll just briefly introduce them, and they'll come up one at a time to give their remarks. And then, as Alejandra said, we'll have a panel discussion. Think about questions you have. We'd love to hear from you. Unfortunately, R.T. Rybak, the president of the Minneapolis Foundation, was unable to be here tonight, and he sends his regrets. However, we do have Brent Ryan, who is the Vice Provost at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he's a professor of urban design and public policy there. We also have Jennifer Yoos, who's the head of our Department of Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and Interior Design. She's also the CEO of the Minneapolis architectural firm VJAA, and just came here from teaching a class, so she's one busy person. And then finally, we have Dingliang Yang, who's an assistant professor in the architecture program. He's a McKnight land grant professor. He's also a partner in the Chinese architectural firm Vari Design, and he is the curator of the exhibition over at the Weisman. So with that, I think I'll invite Brent up to the stage. So Brent.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to travel out to Minneapolis from Boston, where a little bit unusually, it's actually colder in Boston today than it is in Minnesota. So I looked at the weather for the next couple of days. I thought, I get to leave all my sweaters and jackets behind. That's great because we're wearing them all in Boston. So I'm very pleased to be coming back to the University of Minnesota, where I've visited in the past, and to share some thoughts on imagining future cities. I'm really looking forward to seeing the exhibition in a little while, and excited by all of the energy that Dingliang has put into this presentation, and excited to share some of that energy with you, because the amount of thinking that's gone on about the design and form of cities, both over the course of the 20th and 21st century, has been tremendous. But there are also a lot of really fascinating things happening now, and I want to share with you a couple of the thoughts that are going through my mind with respect to the future of cities, because we want to understand not only from the exhibit how we have thought about the future of cities, but we also want to think about the future of cities today. I'm going to talk about broadly two issues, what I call social evolution. These are changes in society. And these changes in society, of course, impact the form and design of cities, because cities don't exist without people to both live in them, design them, and build them. So if you don't think about changes in society, it's often hard to think about changes in cities. But I also want to talk about technological progress and the way that technological progress is and will be influencing the design of cities. I want to start by saying that the year 2025 has not been a particularly easy year for cities. nor for urban inhabitants and for Americans and many people worldwide. It's been quite a difficult year. In particular, the cost of living is high. It's getting higher. There's a lot of concern about this politically. It's led to an unstable political situation in the US, but also overseas. And the overseas news often seems to be uniformly bad, or at least troublesome, especially with respect to cities. And we see that cities are the focus of a lot of overseas activities that are quite negative. Not only that, the constant news cycle that we see doesn't necessarily help, and doesn't necessarily help us feel optimistic. So I want to share a spirit of optimism, also a bit of a spirit of inevitability. I often remind my students it doesn't really matter what's happening today exactly. Today's news is today's news, but there are trends underway that whatever happens today, whatever happened last month, is going to shape the future of cities. I teach in a planning department at MIT, and my students sometimes feel pessimistic about their ability to enact change. So I try to reinforce their optimism, and I want to share a few of the things that I discuss with my students, not to get them to forget today's problems, but to remind them about the changes that are going to be influencing future cities in a lot of amazing and positive ways. And that's very exciting. I want to take a special effort to note that these changes that I'm going to discuss will demand substantial attention from the architecture field, from the planning field, and also from the engineering field. Engineers, architects, and planners cooperate to construct cities. These are three of the professions. I don't want to forget landscape architects, of course, but these professions collaborate to construct the cities we have. I don't always see enough attention being paid to these issues that I'm going to discuss, at least in my department and in my school. And so in my role as Vice Provost, and I'm Vice Provost for Space Administration at MIT, all of the university's space, I play a role in determining how that space is utilized. I'm trying to gently shift my university culture, and also my department and my school's culture, to address some of these changes more directly. By the way, I want to make another point. Sometimes we worry a lot about political cycles, who's in office, who's not in office, when's the election coming. To some extent, the changes that I'm going to discuss, it doesn't matter who's in office. In fact, it doesn't even matter whether or not you're in a country that even has elections. And we are fortunate that we do have elections in this country, but there are a lot of countries around the world that don't. These changes are underway in countries that don't have elections as well as countries that do, and to some extent they are immune to whatever parties in power, whatever politics are going on, because they're driven by a kind of evolution. So you could see that as good news or bad news. I choose to see that as good news. I see this as something for the professions and also for society, and thank you all for attending tonight. You are coming from many areas of our society. It's critical for society to be aware of these changes, to understand, and to think about how they're going to impact cities. So let me begin. I want to start by first talking about the aging of society. The United States is getting older as a society. America is aging, and the world is also aging. And the good news is we are an aging society for very positive reasons. In general, although there are steps back, people are healthier. Healthcare is improving around the world. So even if we take one step back, more often than not, we take 2 steps forward, and life expectancies expand. If you look around the world, you see very high life expectancies in a lot of developed countries. The life expectancy in Japan is 84 years old. That's half of everyone in Japan living past the age of 84. It's 81 in Canada, also very high. And many what we would call medium income countries, countries where we wouldn't necessarily expect very long lives, these countries also have very long and increasing life expectancies. I discovered in the course of research for this evening tonight that the life expectancy, median life expectancy in Tunisia is 76 years old. In Turkey, it's 75. Malaysia, 77. So this aging and this increasing of life expectancies is an inevitable trend. Of course, almost everyone wants to live longer. I don't know if you heard in the news this hot mic moment between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin where they were discussing whether or not they could be immortal, they want to transfer themselves into robots or something. Everyone wants to live longer, or almost everyone wants to live longer, and we're getting better at it. But what we're not doing is getting that much better at designing for it. The design professions are behind. Architecture schools and architects are often designing museums. Not that designing museums is bad. Museums are beautiful places to show society's achievements. But we should also be thinking about the design of senior housing. Look at the state of California. Look at the percentage change that we're going to see in the share of population as we move toward the year 2060. Blue means these areas are getting older. The median age is increasing. So California is all in blue with a little bit of orange, meaning those are areas that are getting a little bit younger, but in general, the state is aging. It's not the only state that's experiencing this trend. The room and necessity for design to innovate and to accommodate the aging population is tremendous. I want to share one innovative project from students of mine who conducted this as an architecture and planning thesis last year, and now they've gone into business to actually make this concept a reality. They designed a small-scale senior complex. You can see it there in the image. It's about 8 bedrooms out of a single-family home in Sacramento. So around the country, we have senior citizens living in single-family homes that are too large for them, and there's actually potential to convert some of these single-family homes into small-scale senior complexes, which means that people don't necessarily have to move far away from their neighborhood. They can remain in their neighborhood, and they can live in a small setting with a few neighbors. So my students designed a small-scale senior complex out of a single-family home, simply adding on to the back and creating common space in the center. I think you can see a small courtyard there. Notice that they also created parking space. Those parking spaces are not only for staff, but they have a vision of driverless cars being able to deliver food services and other supplies to these senior homes. So integrating innovations in transportation technology, and don't forget that we have several cities around the United States like Phoenix where driverless cars are now a reality. I don't know, how many of you have been in a driverless car in Phoenix or Los Angeles? Raise your hand if you've been in it. Yeah? Was it cool? I thought it was cool. I did it in Phoenix. My wife was terrified. She had her hands over her face. I said, no, I think it's pretty safe. It was safe. Driverless cars are going to come to more and more and more American cities. I think Minneapolis, St. Paul is probably a great potential region for driverless cars. And driverless cars can help deliver these food services and other services at a much lower cost. Think about staff that often are challenged to reach their place of work through transportation. Staffing in the senior care industry is a tremendous, tremendous challenge, and I'm going to talk more about labor market issues in a little while. Staffing is a tremendous challenge. Driverless cars could actually serve as a way of enhancing staff accessibility. If we look at the urban scale, this is also my students' work. They've redesigned a neighborhood in order to provide additional benefits for seniors. I don't know, does this have a pointer, actually? I don't know if it does or not. Oops. Laser pointer. Oh, there we go. Okay. So you see here 3 buildings. This is a deteriorated commercial strip where you have stores, the businesses that are having some challenges of viability. They're adding a commissary there that would produce food that would then go out to several. You can see this is a typical settlement block in Sacramento. And you can imagine, what if 4 or 5 of these homes were converted to the type of senior care complexes that I was showing? You can actually establish commissaries where the food could be produced and then shared overall. And then here is a school. You can see it here. And it's a school where a developer has built an addition. As societies age, the number of children often becomes smaller, and many municipalities are having challenges paying for the maintenance of schools, for the funding and upgrading of schools. So they've added on a senior social center to the school for seniors to come and engage with children. And they conducted hundreds of interviews with seniors, by the way, and this was often a requested activity. So many changes to neighborhoods could occur as a result of this accommodation of an aging society. I want to note one more thing, which is everything that I've shown here has happened for profit and is being constructed by a private developer. So it's being permitted by government regulation, but it's not actually requiring a lot of funding from government. At the same time as our society is getting older, many societies are often getting smaller. We have a big debate about immigration in this country, but the reality is that immigration is actually a shrinking business, and not too many countries in the decades to come are actually going to be generating immigrants. In other words, immigrants may become something of an endangered species. I think in 20 years, the immigration debate will be that countries are competing to receive immigrants rather than wanting to turn them back. We'll have to see. The good news there is that migration will probably be less of a political issue as we move forward. The bad news is that labor is going to become scarcer as we have fewer younger people. The big news, and this is really big news, and you're starting to see economists beginning to panic about this news, birth rates across the globe are dropping. Why are they dropping? There are many causes given, but I believe that the most dominant cause is actually good news, which is that mothers have better health. Their children also have better health, therefore children are less likely to pass away in infancy. And also women are gaining civil rights across the planet and joining the workforce and choosing to have fewer children and being able to choose how many children they want to have. Sometimes it's 2, but when you poll women worldwide, many women say, I want 1. And in many parts of Asia, women are saying, I want 0. I don't want any children. Take a look at these population pyramids. These are just 2 population pyramids. It's from a website called populationpyramid.net. I spend many hours surfing this website. I find population pyramids fascinating. In essence, it's showing us how many people you have in a young cohort going all the way up to the amazing age of 100 plus. It says 0, but that's a rounding number. It's probably 0.1%. But that means 0.1% of the world is over 100 years old. And look, about 4.1% of boys, 3.9% of girls worldwide are between 0 and 4 years old. Notice the size of these cohorts. That's why it's called a pyramid, because generally it's a pyramidal form, which means each year you have more and more people at a younger age. If you look at countries like Africa, countries in Africa that are very, very young, this bottom of the population pyramid is extremely large. It looks like a kind of a shallow pyramid. But look at the world's population pyramid. There are actually fewer children between 0 and 4 years old than there are between 5 and 9 worldwide. That's an incredible change, probably the first time in human history. And look at Japan. Japan is what we call an aging society. The largest cohorts are in the 50 to 54 range and in the 75 to 79 range. Those are the largest groups in Japan. In other words, if we count retirement age around 65, 67, look at the amount of population in Japan that's above retirement age. So these show a radical change in the human condition, and more countries are moving toward the Japanese population pyramid. When you have fewer children, you have fewer schools. And eventually, when you have fewer children, you have a shrinking population. In Japan, the population shrinkage phenomenon is advanced. Japan is losing 900,000 people a year. In 2009, there were 127 million people in Japan. Today, there are under 120 million people in Japan. Many countries around the world are beginning to lose population. If you go to countries like Italy, Spain, Greece, even China, nationwide population loss is a serious issue. This brings very, very powerful challenges for designers, and eventually will bring powerful challenges to the world. This is a graph showing the world's population growth, and what we see is that somewhere around 2050, that's 25 years from now, not too far away, the world's population is going to even out, and then the world will start losing population. So what I tell my architecture students is get ready to deal with existing buildings a lot more than you're going to deal with new buildings, because when you have a shrinking population, you need many fewer new buildings. This is the city of Nagasaki, where I did a workshop with my students. And what we have here, this is downtown Nagasaki, but this is a hillside area immediately adjacent to Nagasaki with hundreds of empty, abandoned houses. As people pass away, their kids who have moved to Tokyo or Fukuoka, other cities, they don't want to come back. No one wants the house. The housing market in Japan, prices are actually dropping. Nobody wants these houses. My workshop students took 3 houses and combined them to design a collective house that allowed older residents to move out of nearby homes so that they could remain in their neighborhood even if their home was abandoned or demolished. You can see here that the house provides several different kinds of units as well as a hotel. This is an innovative architectural program that's designed to permit houses where no one lives to be demolished and they become open spaces, and older residents who want to move out of their home can move into a home nearby, as many people choose to live in the neighborhood where they lived most of their life as they mature. I'll mention one more change that's happening that's going to demand immense technological input. This change is what I call changes in architectural and urban technology. In my role at MIT, architecture and building is hitting the wall in terms of costs. Traditional construction in a high-cost city like Boston is simply getting too expensive. Here we see cost escalation nationwide, and we see that between 2021 and 2025, construction costs are up about 20%, and in Boston, even higher. How do you address this? One way is you have to build more cheaply. So we're building a lot in wood in Boston. That's less expensive than building in concrete and steel. And almost all multifamily in Boston is actually now wood, like this example in Milwaukee that was constructed a couple of years ago. This has some advantages. Wood is cheaper. It's also ideally more sustainable, but it's still very labor intensive. It still has to be built by people on site, and it's not driving housing costs down in any meaningful way in Boston. So how do we get around this wall of rising costs? As part of my administrative role at MIT, I'm trying to pioneer a new project that utilizes the following technologies with the sole goal, actually I don't want to say the only goal is to lower costs, but the principal goal is to lower costs, also to be more sustainable at the same time. So this academic year, we're going to take an MIT building on an outlying site in Massachusetts and investigate the potential for replacing that building using prefabricated technology, recycled materials, focusing on what I call circular ecology so that you're recycling water systems, recycling energy within the building, and also using AI to assist by driving down the costs of design. All of this will have impacts on architecture in the future, but right now these innovations are not routine. Business as usual in Boston is not using very many of these innovations at all. I think we need to bring in all of these innovations in order to lower costs and in order to make our cities more affordable. I go back to the original message I had at the beginning of rising costs in cities that are causing tremendous political concern. If we can do that and innovate and bring down all these projects, we can actually expand the scale of these innovations to the entire city. And here you see an image coming from a study of code reform in Boston that shows how you could actually generate much cheaper buildings by reforming building codes, but why not by also using all the innovations that I mentioned before? So as we expand these innovations at MIT, we can expand them to housing, to classroom buildings, childcare centers, offices, and laboratories. And we'll be helping ourselves at the university scale, but also hopefully providing a brighter future for the architecture, engineering, and planning professions, and bringing costs down for consumers, which should be one of our primary missions. I firmly believe that mainstreaming technological innovations is a critical way and the primary way in which design, engineering, and planning will remain in the driver's seat of change in our cities. And as we expand these at scale, we'll see these impacts citywide. I'll close by saying that about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called The Largest Art. And in that book, I theorized that urban design was actually moving away from the large-scale utopian project, the kind of single dome out in the woods, or what they were thinking of building in Saudi Arabia, this city that was 5 miles long, moving away from single large-scale projects towards smaller, spatially interrelated projects within existing urban fabrics that improve the existing cities we have through innovations in design and technology. I believe strongly that urban design, especially with a shrinking and aging society, should improve the cities we have rather than replace them wholesale. And I can see this happening in all the ways I've discussed today. Designers can and should lead the way in helping us make these changes. There's a lot more to discuss. I'm fascinated by the changes ahead for cities, and I look forward to our conversation in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me today, and thank you to the Weisman for putting on this wonderful exhibition, and Dingliang for all of your incredibly hard work. I wanted to talk about this from kind of a different perspective. The idea of imagining future cities, I think we look through these exhibitions and we walk around and we think, oh, this was never built, this could have been built. This is really exciting to think this way, but this could never happen. My partner and I, for many years, have been obsessed with Minneapolis's skyway system. I'll show some of that work in a second, but largely because these came from these imaginative speculations that were really ambitious, that they were coming out of social utopian ideas in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And then they evolved and migrated as people were starting to try to understand how to build cities, how to build new kinds of democratic open cities, how to encounter some of the problems that we're seeing today with transportation, with technology, creating more equitable, accessible space, more inclusive spaces, and really changing the form of cities. And many of these things never happened, but they just kept being revisited and revisited. So this is our skyway system, and you may be very familiar with this map, but what was interesting to us is kind of how this happened, that nobody designed this, that many people claimed the idea locally, but that really this happened incrementally and kind of subversively, and people didn't really know it existed or looked at it in this form until it was already done. So this idea that you could create an urbanism through all of these imaginations and then implement it without anybody knowing was endlessly fascinating. When I first met Brent many years ago, my partner and I were developing this exhibition at MIT. It was great. We got funding to do this, and we developed all of these different maps and tried to really document these cities. And I think we documented 16 cities that had systems just like ours. And we tracked, the policies that enabled them, what were the impetus, how much were they planned and non-planned. And what was most interesting to us were things that seemed to be not designed, but that were designed through policies and regulations and kind of happenstance or habit. We convinced the Walker Art Center to produce this catalog. Originally, we had worked with Andrew Blauvelt to develop an exhibition. And in the end, we ended up doing this book that was just as much about this collection of all of these amazing projects throughout history. And we kept going back and forth. Is this really about cities? Is this about buildings? And how are they the same? And a lot of what we realized is that architecture is also a form of urbanism, and that the way that we think about cities is also the way that we think about buildings, about how people move, how people feel, just all of the things that impact their lives. So these are a couple of the early progenitors of the Minneapolis Skyway system. You see Vesnin's project, Russian constructivist project in 1934, and I see projects within the last 20 years that are doing the exact same thing. And it's all about social connectivity. How do you look at buildings that are really silos and connect people to each other and make it easier to access? And their argument was that this makes space more democratic. So the Skyway system, you would argue, really isn't that. It's really commercially controlled, and depending on where it is, people have access or they don't have access. The other one that we were really interested in was the ideas that came out of Charles Fourier's Fallon Stair, and ideas in France and the early 1800s, mid-1800s, that were addressing disease in cities and wellness, and how do you make a healthier city? And they were looking at kind of how do you create the perfect community, the perfect society, and some of it was really uncomfortable, some of it was really scary, and a little bit too top-down. But a lot of it came down to how do you make this connected kind of amazingly vital, active space, which is relevant today and true in everything we need. The image on the far right is Victor Gruen in 1952, who we argue is where the Skyways came from, where he was the person who was here working on shopping malls, at the same time working on his plan for Fort Worth, preceding his plan, his Heart of the City work and his work with CM. So he was really bringing in a lot of ideas that were happening around that period of time in different centers in London and in Paris, and that were migrating the ideas from the constructivists and the Bauhaus that were really experimental, imaginative, and speculative to places where people didn't know where they had originated, what they were to be for, and he thought, well, this is going to be a great idea for retail, and a winter city and interiorizing spaces. So the purpose changed, and as it evolved, the way people used them changed. They kind of lost their original motivation and different ambitions. This is the plan for London that preceded ours, and they were also going to do one of these systems, and it completely failed. You see little pieces of it around kind of the South Bank and all of the elevated art centers that people like Archigram and others were working on, really producing experimental, speculative work at the same time as doing real work, and the ideas would cross over. And areas like the Barbican that were coming out of a lot of competitions and design competitions where people were imaginative wildly. It also migrated to Hong Kong, where the London city planner kind of was still the same planner in Hong Kong, which we forget about. So a lot of these ideas and the origins of these systems really also influenced a really imaginative multi-level system in Hong Kong that had very different regulations, very different property ownerships, and allowed a lot of different things to happen that didn't happen in Minneapolis. And then the way that we respond to these things as they are here. This is artist Yona Freeman on the left, imagining Manhattan as if it were Minneapolis, and the Guthrie Theater kind of playing off of our regulations and our Skyway system to leverage other things that it wanted. For many years, my partner and I did a lot of experimental studios with students. So this is one we did in Minneapolis, looking at the riverfront, the post office site, where students started to imagine how these things became social connectors and condensers and activators of space. But it was really all about movement. And relooking at a series of cities that also had these kind of proposed systems and how they might transform. These were students at WashU. We did a Highline studio and took students from the University of Arkansas to London to look at these systems. And they proposed this elaborate housing and monorail kind of adaptation for the Highline. And more students looking at cities in Hong Kong and developing research and looking at kind of some of these traditional typologies for social engagement that had kind of evolved out of local typologies. Cities like Calgary that are really problematic, how could you change what these systems could become and be more ambitious again? So the idea that architecture is a form of urbanism and we can learn from these things also really infused our practice. And while we were doing this work, we did a design competition at the American University of Beirut for a student center. And we started to look at it as if it was a building in a field. And then we started to look at it as if it was a set of urban conditions and about how you change how people interact with each other. And it immediately, thinking about the social and the environmental together and how these things kind of interact, opened up a whole set of ideas when we stopped thinking about it a building problem and we started thinking about it as an urban problem. So we looked at how do you break these things apart, how do they shade each other, how does air move, much how people design cities and how do people speculate on cities in their earliest forms. And instead of looking at buildings as these autonomous things, we looked at how do the buildings shade the spaces in between, how do you move vertically for more comfort, how do you connect to each other more socially. Another project that we were really excited about in our office that finished up finally maybe a year ago after about a 10-year period was the Minnesota Museum of American Art. We were interested in our research in a lot of the early Manhattan kind of studies in the turn of the century about layers of transportation and the superimposition of different forms of movement. And in the 60s, they were interested in these access trees that solved this problem of separating traffic on two levels and connecting them across. So we started to play with these in this project. So this is kind of our condition as we're seeing it, what Minneapolis and St. Paul looks like, of the street grid overlaid with the skyway grid. And this is the condition of the M, which was originally a remnant of an imitation by Cass Gilbert of the Paris arcades and an interior street with a stained glass kind of vaulted space, open air, which seems odd in Minnesota. And then the climate protected second level skyway system that was added in the 60s and totally tore up everything and where everything changed. And a lot of the project was about the collision of these things and how do you reactivate downtown in ways that kind of has been destroyed by these systems. How do you connect vertically? How do you reactivate the street? And how do you bring the skyway system through? So the image on the right is kind of our extension of the skyways into an old coal yard. And then this is the restoration of the old arcade space that had been covered over during that period of time that's now the galleries. Another piece that we were interested in was the importance of circulation. We were working for the Department of Transportation on rest stops, and we were really fascinated that they saw slowing things down and getting people to stop and walk around as being a health and safety issue. That you don't drive when you're tired, you get out, you move, you get exercise, it makes the road safer. So we started to think about circulation as experience and how do you get people to spend more time looking at kind of some of this early Bauhaus work of all of the excitement, the kind of spectacle of movement. So we looked at the existing project that had a series of existing odd circular shapes from the 70s, these really strange paths, this hidden creek, and we tried to make it a spectacle. Using multi-layers of circulation, trying to weave through these series of bridges that you can kind of come in, you walk around, you walk through, and it's kind of infinite loops that pass you through playground structures and overlooks of the site where you go onto trails, and you slow down and you stay there longer. And so it impacts you in other ways that are both social, that are kind of about your well-being. The last thing I wanted to show was another part that I think Dingliang really emphasized in his exhibition, which is about the importance of the river for the Twin Cities. And this is something that he and I have been working on together with our studios, and we're connecting the work that we're doing together. Concurrently, I've been working on river projects for about 10, 15 years in the Twin Cities, and particularly this project, the River Learning Center, that's looking at a site on an old abandoned marina, a series of abandoned construction sites that used to be a completely natural space overlooking the Badote, which is a sacred space for the Dakota and kind of the origin of life. And this whole site was really about people gathering and connecting and using the routes of water to get down to the river, to connect people living along the river, that there was really, this is how people had boat access in different ways, kind of throughout the Twin Cities' really early history. And then you look at how this has evolved and all of the different things that we have done along the river, how we've carved it out. There's these bays that were used for industry to extract sand to make glass out of the sides. There's remnants of two 24-story towers that were never built, and hundreds of piles in the ground, piles of refuse. And this site has really been changed so much over time that it's really not the same. So how do you start to think about, do you restore, do you reclaim, how do you adapt? What does this new kind of reality become? And it's a complicated set of questions. The project that I was just came from today, I took some students out to Pig's Eye landfill in St. Paul, and this has been a 3-year studio that we've taken on, and we have concurrent, we have a project that Ati Westfall is doing with Juxtaposition Arts in North Minneapolis. We have one that Maura Rockcastle and Ross Altheimer are doing that's also on Pig's Eye and that we've collaborated a lot. And then we have one that Wan Jingji and Scott Ellefson are doing, looking at another set of sites along the river. This one was really fascinating to us because this is one of the most polluted sites in the city. It's an unlicensed landfill. It's full of PFAS and cyanide and every awful thing you can imagine in an unlined dump. And we first started it because the premise was, can you build here but not touch anything, not disturb what's below the soil? You have a thin cap, don't go below it, just float above it. Don't just pretend it's not there. And the students obviously did not like that premise, so they changed the studio on us very quickly. And we also discussed the other thing that was being explored, which you spend, $1 billion or $2 billion taking all the toxic soil and everything out of it and cart it somewhere else and leave it there. And they also didn't like that. What they liked is the idea that you could incrementally change it over time. So we developed a series of projects that were both inspired, and we've been doing this for multiple years, at the pollution control maps of the site, looking at what kind of toxins are where, and an amazing artist, Mel Chin, who did the remediation field there in the 1990s, looking at phyto and bioremediation and how you could slowly clean the site over time. He wanted to extract metals, burn the plants, sell the metals, get more plants, and that was his way of creating a business over time, which was really magical. So the students took on the kind of mission of Mel Chin, and they analyzed all of the different parts of the site to look at what can we remove and how can we remove it. And they discovered all of these amazing technologies of getting rid of PFAS and all sorts of different toxins using different techniques. This one looks at how do you clean up railroad runoff. This one created a factory looking at the idea of pennyroyals and aspen trees, which were coming out of Mel Chin's work. And each one of these really set up something that created a civic space, a place that we learn about kind of our actions on the earth, that we learn about ways to solve it. And the program evolved, and they figured out how do you occupy this place that's really directly almost in the city, but not visible to anyone. This was another one in the Pig's Eye Lake, creating a clean area of water and a habitat for mussels that have kind of disappeared from the river and being reintroduced to slowly start to clean parts. This one was two different ideas, really trying to find forms that had been there and were already there and not legible. This one reintroduces the old kind of meander of Bassett Creek, which is a natural filtration process with a series of bioswales. The one on the right looks at a natural filtering system that had already been used, following these exact patterns as how they had been implemented, about where you would want to create barriers relative to the existing dumps, relative to the floodplains, but pulling it up and creating infrastructure out of it so it could be inhabited and used. So there's these wonderful, playful, experimental ideas that would never be built, but also could hopefully infect people with other ideas about what they might do in this condition if they ever got to do a building or a city. So thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. And before I starting to approaching my 3 approaches for imagining future cities, I just want to say special thanks to the members from Weisman and all the student RAs and researchers and members of our college. Without any of them, the event and the forum will not be happen. So I just want to say thank you so much. I always think architectural city design should be public-facing, and in that way, there is always a question: is how to communicating with the public about how we get to the stage we are, meaning why the city we live in actually being designed like they are, and to that sense, meaning the cities are always in a certain way of evolution and transformation. For instance, if you look at the downtown riverfront of Minneapolis, just about 5 decades ago, it is very industrial. And now it is becoming urban destinations. Many of these knowledges I learned, I like cities. I think cities are as resources, and Minneapolis is my new destination. Many of these knowledge are passed by Jennifer and Tom to me after I arrived at school. So you will see a lot of their research has been embedded into the thinking here. One thing deserves to be mentioned a little bit more is about no matter we like the space or not, it always been evolving. And instead of complaining and trying to being critical about certain space, probably it is a moment that we can encourage more participants and voice into discussing of shaping the cities. The reason is, if we look at the Nicollet Mall here, it has been initially designed as a way, as you can see, a boulevard. And afterwards, it's becoming very pedestrian. And still the mid photo, I myself like very much. I don't know how many of you like. It is, the farmer's market is beautiful. But now we look at the third one, it has been designed for the buses and pedestrians with a very good will. But regardless of it is good or bad in terms of outcome, it shows the space and the innovations has been evolving. And it's important to have a common vision or discuss what it should be, city should be, and how it is good for everyone. And I put a note here, we need to keep reinventing cities because a certain innovation is good for a certain period, but afterwards it may dysfunction. 3 approaches that you will see in the exhibition later will be showcased in 3 parts. The first one, it's called the experimental approach. And the second one is called, the first one is called the theoretical approach. The second one is called experimental approach. And the third one is called perceptual approach. And they are more proved by different case studies. You will see there. The first one is more about the paradigmatic projects. The second one is more about World's Fair. And the third one is more about river cities. First one, theoretical approach explores the utopian visions from early 20th century that has influenced the discourse of city making and the particular city of tomorrow. So it is in the Dayton Gallery. 3 ideas are being discussed. The first one is multi-level city. The second one is ecology city. And the third one is linear city. This is how you will see in the museum. As Jennifer deciphered, the multi-level city has been, as a very visionary or even called a utopian idea, has been grounded into one of the major landmarks of Twin Cities today. And also, there is another heavily debated project, I don't know whether many of you know, but I got introduced to this by Tom, is a very fascinating project in the 1960s. Trying to incorporating different ideas of domes, man-made nature, and different things under a certain controlled environment. Even though the project never happened, but it showed the discussion can actually influence a certain way of people thinking cities. The very last one is about the linear city, which can be named as a canonic way of organizing cities, trying to polarizing streamlined transportation and spatial organizations, trying to make everything as efficient as possible. MDC has been doing a project around Lake Superior cities, which is a recent effort but trying to cooperating ecology and city making ideas about like half Earth. You can hear more from Tom. And this is a view of showing real world examples in Minnesota demonstrating these three theoretical ideas. And as you can see from these images, the exhibition always left side is global, the right side is Minnesota. So bridging these global and local examples, we are trying to make a dynamic dialogues about the international trend, but also the local innovations. The second one, we call it experimental approach. An experiment in the scientific procedure, always involving a certain way of discovery, testing a hypothesis, or demonstrate a known act. And in this way, World's Fair, because it's a mega event involving millions of people, becoming a very good fairground to communicating a certain urban innovations with public, and also testing whether this idea can be accepted. This is in the Gallery B. So this gallery highlights 5 exemplary exhibitions and pavilions presented bold urban visions, namely the White City, the Model City, the Futurama, the Democracy, and the World of Tomorrow. So as I mentioned before, as engage millions of audience, actually these exhibitions put forwards to many of the city artifacts that we see today. I will prove it. So first, in the Twin Cities, you can see these pictures. I know to many of the artistic colleagues, these are not the artistic work in an artistic museum, but I do think they are very they are real connections to all the visitors, because these are the places we know. And we can also, if you look a little bit further, decoding the reasons why these projects are developed like that. The City Beautiful movement, using White City as a demo in 1893 Chicago World's Fair, trying to show the cities can be designed by artistic principles, means clean, orderly, safe, neoclassical facades, different definitions of language in architecture, but it have a huge impact on the civic centers across the whole country. And today, if you look at, that is the axis, some of you may know, designed by Cass Gilbert, looking from the cathedral to the Capitol is one of the manifestation of this movement. The second is the model city. So in contrasting to City Beautiful movement, emphasize on the artistic principles, the model city emphasizes on technical and functional aspects of urban design. And it has a direct impact of give birth to the modern discipline of city planning and also the zoning practice. And here you can see St. Paul in Minnesota is actually one of the earliest 4 cities adopted the zoning codes. You look at this picture, you will see, oh, it explains why the downtown St. Paul has a very different appearance to the downtown Minneapolis, which looks at the far in the background. In 1939 to 40 New York World's Fair, there are 2 complementary exhibits and pavilion. The left one is Road of Tomorrow, carried out by the Ford Pavilion. The middle one is the exhibition curated by Norman Bell Gaddis, known as the Futurama. And this picture or the scenes look very familiar to us today, but imagine before 1939, the combination between skyscraper, highway, and the modern cars, it's never existed before. So it's a pure invention of combining the things together, later becoming we know of American lifestyle and American dream, describing different literatures. And so we can see I-35. I know many of you have different ideas of which is the first expressway or highway in Minnesota, but that is one approved by the Department of Transportation here, so that's the one, the first interstate highway in town. In the same World's Fair, it showcased another idea called democracy. It is backed by, guided by Regional Planning Association of America, RPAA, and thinking actually the city can be dispersed into the landscape and putting people into smaller towns and smaller new towns. And this can actually enhancing the quality of life, considering the congestion in bigger cities. And this has a direct impact on the suburb today. And while we are very familiar with the pattern of shopping mall and suburb, but it's actually also another kind of innovations. As Jennifer's slides showed, Victor Groom's designed one of the first shopping malls, Southdale, and this is a colonial neighborhood in Edina. We find the blueprints. That was the initial concept to putting these two things together. So they're indeed one of the projects to prove the direct impact. In 1962, Seattle World's Fair also featured an exhibit called World of Tomorrow, which influenced by Yona Friedman's Spatial City, but also the same time Japanese metabolism movement. And it has a very interesting impact on how we not only design, but also constructing our cities, meaning via vertical city notion, modular system, and prefabrications. And Cedar Riverside, we just talked about that. I was talking about that with Brent. It's a never finished project that belongs to a certain period of modern dream. So this is a scene you will see. One of the side shows different projects that have been influenced at the national scale. And since we talk about World's Fairs, there's no way to avoid the Minnesota efforts representing the USA for the two bids, which trying to ground the World's Fair after 40 years in the US. The first bid is 2023, and I got aware the project at the beginning was envisioned around the campus. So it proposed around the medical district and the Malcolm Yards area, a purely pedestrian-oriented district. Even though the project never goes through, but today we see the redevelopment of Malcolm Yards, we still can trace certain impact of things on that. Another bid is the 2027, which trying to hosting an event in Bloomington, right next to the airport, but also the largest mall, the Mall of America, and trying to think how this strategic location can bring in international, regional, and local visitors through different scales to this place to showcasing modern techniques of telecommunication, telehealth. And it's an interesting notion about airport city, which colliding different scales and different potentials on the same place. The third one is perceptual approach to the city design. And this term perceptual actually has been debated very heavily among the curatorial team because it's not a normal term used in the contemporary way of architecture design or urban design. But we think it's a word that bestly describing actually the design engages experience, sense, and understand, and also respond to a certain urban space. And in this way, it actually can bring more voice of community into the way of shaping cities. And this relationship between perception and space can actually shifting, inspiring, can be a very important way of the contemporary city design. This is the last, the one very close to the River Gallery, in A Gallery. By presenting 3 global cases, which we will see Paris, New York, Shanghai, and Twin Cities, we're trying to shape a certain dialogue between how the city actually shaping around a river in the 21st century. And then many of you may have a question saying, well, maybe Paris, New York, Shanghai have a larger population, but if you're purely looking at the space, Twin Cities is actually larger. these drawings are all in the same scale of the mapping of different cities, which means we should have more opportunities to creating space that is accessible and can echoing the different needs of contemporary challenges. So Weisman team is very good to manage to putting the 1 to 10,000 graphic of the river onto the floor, and in which you will stepping into it is true north. So you will see the feature of the river and sensing the importance of the river. In this way, we also not only trying to put them on the comparative way, but also trying to understand in the Twin Cities what is the nature or the interpretation of Mississippi River. So we call this section Mississippi River as, so trying to understanding 3 very important challenges. First is, what is the environmental stewardship for this place? 2, what is adaptive use of used to be industrially heavy dominated structure along some of the key sites? 3, how we can recognize different indigenous culture heritage and manifesting them in the contemporary dialogue, because many of these knowledges or the phenomena have been buried by the industrialization projects. So these are the dialogues we explored, and we're trying to understanding across the whole river what are the different projects that have been undertaken by different stages of time, and argue today maybe the river should be acting as an urbanistic spine that connects life and nature and the society together. Different student works has been featured there as allow me to use the words placeholder to showing the potential of this space, but also showing infinite potential that the different design exercise can be put in there, as long as we can have a deep communication with the community, with all the more participants. Probably we can find a common agreement on which type of future city along the river it will be guided into. So these are different shots from the exhibition. The photos are taken by Pete Siegler, which is a very good photographer, and he did it for pro bono, so I don't think it's important to recognize his efforts. Yeah, we did offer payment, but he likes the project very much. So the exhibition ends in an exploration of Twin Cities as a river city. So as I mentioned before, the 3 type of challenges also echoing 3 different type of sustainabilities that the society needs: environmental sustainability, cultural sustainability, and economic sustainability. As long as we can deal with things with the different aspirations and creativities, probably this exhibition can show enough dialogue and reflection to not only communicating with everybody, how our city is being built as the way we are and where we should be, but also calling as an action to urging us to participating in the dialogue of city of tomorrow. So I hope you will enjoy the exhibition, and we are going to have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there a microphone there? So we're going to start the panel, so come on up. We'll find a microphone somewhere. Oh, here it is. Found it. These are on the chairs. Thank you. And I'll start with some questions, but certainly we'd love to hear from you, the audience. Brent, one of the things you said at the beginning really struck me. You made the observation, I think is true, is that cities are the same whether they're in authoritarian countries or in democracies, that cities somehow are a being unto themselves sort of globally, regardless of their political context. And it made me think, one, is that one reason why we have so much hostility towards cities in this country right now? Because they're in a way kind of independent of the nation state. Also, you know, your pyramid idea too, you talked about how there's the shrinking base of pyramids is in part because of women being educated, which I think is true. But also I wondered how much of that is also because of urbanization. In other words, we need fewer children because more of us are living in cities. So what role do you think cities are playing in this kind of geopolitical and demographic shifts that you're talking about?
So cities
Yeah, it's on.
This is working. Cities are playing a huge role, and because another statistic that I didn't show, but one that's often cited, is that, of course, the world's population is more and more and more living in at least metropolitan areas or living in cities. So cities become essentially the arena in which the human condition is playing out worldwide. That's very positive for a lot of the trends that I'm illustrating. For example, better health. It's a lot easier globally to obtain better health living in a city. And I'm not talking about only the United States. The United States, we have such excellent transportation. We're such a highly developed country that you can live in a rural area and sometimes have excellent health care. That's not the case globally. People know that if they live in a city, they're going to be obtaining better health care. They're going to be having a better quality of life. This is going also to be a socially liberating force. Once you're in a city, you have access to broader economy. And if the president of the university were here, I would talk to her about how when you hire a new professor, you often want to bring that professor's spouse also into the economy. And it's easier to do so in a city because the Twin Cities has a much larger economy than, say, poor Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois is located. So in other words, the city becomes a force of economic liberation, and that in turn drives birth rates down because cities are more expensive and because the family is busier.
Right.
So the urban condition is intimately wound up in a lot of the conditions that I'm speaking about. Also with respect to the aging society, as Japan is finding, it's much easier to be a senior citizen in an urban area than in a remote rural area. It's more expensive to provide health services to rural areas. It's also harder to get around rural areas. So the transition away from driving is something that happens in Japan. Often when people are in their 80s, they stop driving or it becomes more difficult to drive. It's easier in a city to have alternate modes of mobility. So the city is also much more supportive of the aging condition. And something Japan is toying with that I think it will be challenging in this country. Japan is toying with whether or not you actually want to encourage people strongly to live in an urban area by maybe providing additional amenities for senior citizens in urban areas like senior centers or more affordable senior housing, what we would call the kind of carrot approach to lure people to come back to live in cities because it's actually an easier place when you're in your 80s and 90s, at least is in Japan. So the urban condition is intimately interwoven with these
There's all
situations.
of that, yeah. And sort of building on the point, Jennifer, one of the things that you said that really struck me is how the multi-level city had this health component to it, right? Separating people from cars and what have you, but also this idea that urban visions are often related to hygiene and health. And how much of that do you think is still a factor as we think about these multi-level cities?
Well, I think a lot of it is convenience, that it's, is this working?
Yeah, there's a button there.
Okay. A lot of it is convenience, and a lot of it is intuitive. I think so much of what got implemented is really driven by commercialization. And, whether it's office structures, it tends to be more single use, or whether it's shopping malls and turning the downtown into a mall, it's about property tax and revenue. So there are all of these incentives that aren't things trying to be designed or to be for the greater good. But I think there's enough demand from people, and they come and they use things if that is there for them. And so if they feel like it's serving them. So it's kind of a back and forth, and, but I don't know how much role the designer has in it.
Yeah, it's part of bigger forces. So Dingliang, I should mention to the audience that Dingliang has a 2-volume history of expos about to come out, so it's fabulous. But I wanted to sort of pursue some of the points you were making about expos and the role they've played as sort of ways to think about future cities. We've typically done that. But and you observe this, we haven't had an expo here in 40 years. And so I wonder, have we in the United States sort of lost the habit of thinking about future cities? That somehow we've kind of lost that sense of thinking about possibilities, in part because we haven't had an expo to do it.
There are multiple reasons for, of course, there are funding, political reasons. But in the way of, I can speak a little bit about the countries or the cities they're trying to hosting the expo, and still thinking that could be ignites more of urban innovations. In many cases, innovations in small scale are showed, in domestic scale, are showed in the different pavilions. But in a longer innovation actually is manifested in the long-term planning for the use of the site. Because in the history, many of the sites either become a university campus or they are obsolete, they're abandoned and creating a lot of troubles. So since the transitioning of around late 20th century, when people are thinking, well, we are entering an information age, we don't need the expo anymore. But actually, according to VIE, the applicants, the countries for the expo is drastically increased. Besides people like to party, but also people are thinking mega events could be a very good tool in a democratic society to doing something for public good, meaning increasing of the amount of distance of public transportation, or changing in a certain status of certain, or a pre-assumption for a certain neighborhood. So these are the different things actually are very effective by incorporating in a mega event to that particular place. So there are urban innovations embedded in a longer run, but also the event itself showing some smaller scales of innovations as well, but also very decisive. For instance, the black box, are all these things are all showing the World's Fairs. So it still shows its way of showing technological innovations, but the urban innovations is also indeed still functioning.
Yeah, good. Do we have any? Yes. How about there?
I apologize for my memory because I read the book in my 30s, and I'm a little bit older now.
Aging
But,
society.
Jane Jacobs tried to convince us, or at least convince me, that the ideal city was walkable and of mixed use. But that generally requires a relatively high density of living.
Can you speak in the microphone? I can't hear you.
Sure.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
So I was speaking about Jane Jacobs, who wrote a book that argued that the ideal city, at least what I remember, would be walkable and of mixed use neighborhoods. This requires a certain density of population to actually achieve. Now, I wondered why Europe and European cities that I happen to like to visit, like Vienna and Rome, and had this this density, and many cities in the United States didn't. And it occurred to me that the main driving force, I would argue, for our suburbanization and lack of density in the cities is one, cost, and two, fear. And is there any way to increase the density of our cities such that they would be more attractive, more walkable, and have all the benefits that you just talked about, economies of scale, delivery of healthcare, cheaper transportation, less cars, less pollution, et cetera. So any comments about fear, money, and suburbanization of America?
Do you want to take that, Brent?
I'll just speak briefly about this Sacramento neighborhood that my students and I were looking at. So this Sacramento neighborhood would not make Jane Jacobs very happy. It doesn't look anything like Greenwich Village. It looks like Sacramento. It's what you might call suburban sprawl. It's actually fairly high density, like much of California's suburban neighborhoods. It's pretty high density. It has some commercial activity, but usually on the larger roads at the periphery. It's what we're inheriting as a country. We're inheriting many of these older suburban neighborhoods. This one was developed in the 1980s. I think it's not that ancient a neighborhood. These neighborhoods need to be adapted because most Americans actually live in neighborhoods like that, not in neighborhoods like Jane Jacobs Greenwich Village, which is actually a pretty pricey neighborhood these days if you've been there. These neighborhoods need to be adapted, and they can be adapted. They'll have to be adapted through partnerships with city planners, through partnerships with municipalities that are changing regulations in order to permit the kinds of changes that are happening. But no, I don't think that we all have to move into walkable mixed-use, mixed-density urban neighborhoods. I think a lot of us will continue to live in these suburban neighborhoods, and the technological changes that I'm seeing will make that easier. So when I was in Phoenix, I found it extremely convenient to get around the city in the driverless car, and it didn't matter that it was a low-density city because I would just get in the driverless car and it would take me to the shopping center. I wasn't even driving. So that's going to liberate us, in many cases, from having to drive. That's one of the reasons why we say, you can't live in suburbs, you have to move to a walkable neighborhood because you want to be freed from the car. But the driverless car will free us from that. At the same time, we'll need changing activities in those suburban neighborhoods as the makeup of the population changes. The makeup of the population, whether you want it to or not, it's happening, will be fewer children and more people in the upper decades of the age spectrum. We will be obliged to adapt our suburban neighborhoods to accommodate that social reality. And designers will help us do it.
Yeah. The other point you made, I think, is interesting. So this idea of how can we have all the good things about cities without some of the bad, the crime and the pollution. There's been a group of biophysicists out of the Santa Fe Institute who have been studying cities and argue that, in fact, as all the benefits increase, so do the downsides, right? So you have more economic prosperity, more intellectual activity, but you also end up with more crime and more pollution, right? And in fact, I think that some of the visionary ideas about cities have been trying to answer that very question, which is how can we have all the good things about a city, but not have all the bad? And I don't know if it's ever going to be achieved, but it sort of drives a lot of what I think is in the exhibit. So it's a good question.
There's an ideal density.
Could be, maybe.
Too much is bad, and too little is
Yeah.
also.
Yeah, that's right. Finding that right balance. So here, yeah.
Excuse me. I'm wondering if any of the blue zone research is ever considered in any of these discussions and in the research. I know that our town or our city here in Minnesota, Alexandria, has been working on a redesign. And one of the things that the blue zone research shows, longevity and good health comes from socialization. And I'm watching now on University Avenue, there are boxes built right up to the curb. There is no place that people could meet at a bench. There's no place where you could have any kind of open socialization on the street. And I'm looking at socialization in the broadest sense, but it's something I'm not hearing from any of you.
Who wants to talk about that?
I can briefly. I think we all here, I believe, we all like open space and public space. And one of the things, if you allow me to say, of the silver lining of the pandemic is actually we see many streets are being used. For instance, we see more and more people eating on the street. More coffee shop is open to the streets. So we do see open space functioning very importantly for our cities. And to certain rationale behind for economy or certain things, running for FAR, meaning floor area ratio, for the density, that's part of understanding is also, that's a result of certain modernization concept. And in that sense, as you're saying, our city probably needs to be re-envisioned and re-visualized based on the different changes that we are doing. And open space used to be very important in our city for many centuries, until maybe modernization has been changing some of the images of the cities. But indeed, yeah, it's coming back. It will come back.
Let's see. Back here.
This will be our last question. We are about
Okay.
to have to leave the space, so.
Yeah, we have a reception to go to. So I hope to see you all over there, and we'll go over there to answer any further questions. So, Julia, go ahead.
I've been working with people in North Minneapolis with my design studio, and one of the things that they have felt is the designers have come in and told them what to do, never asking what they want. And we haven't educated them as to what they might want. So I'm wondering how you're thinking we could handle getting people more involved in the design of their own communities.
Tom's pointing at me. I think I kind of struggle because you're saying designers do this, and I'm kind of in an academic role for the first time for the last 5 years, and I've always been a designer, so I've always been one of the people who goes into communities. I think that one of the things that it really is about is how do you engage people? And quite often, people start their own projects, and they bring in people, they connect. You really have to kind of immerse yourself in communities to really see them and to understand them. You have to talk to people, you have to spend time with people, you have to socialize, you have to do things on their term, and it's their ideas. So I think that in academia, it seems like we feel like we need to come up with an answer how to better do this, but I think as people, this is something that is natural, that you develop curiosities about things, that you're not looking to impose a kind of universal idea, which is really counter to a lot of these kind of speculative ideas and the challenges of things like skyways, that it's a one-size-fits-all, it doesn't adapt to context, it doesn't really try to understand the climate or the conditions or the way people are living or using spaces. So I think a lot of it is kind of creating room for change, that there are the things that you can understand from the community about what they want, but there may be things that the community doesn't know that they want at that time, or the community may evolve and change. So I think it's also that design has to be adaptable and changeable, and it has to be flexible, and it also has to be within people's means to make those changes. So I think it's a really complicated thing, and I don't think design is something where you kind of parachute in and you give somebody the answer to something. It's a very collaborative process, and it's very site-specific.
Yeah, just to follow on, it's a great question, Julia. I mean, I feel this tension because in the center that I direct, we have part of something in the exhibit, a very visionary idea about the population moving to the Great Lakes, so it's this very utopian idea. But the work we do in my center is exactly what you're talking about, which is we work in communities, we listen to communities, and so it's both and. I mean, I think urban design has become a field that still recognizes that there's some value in the sort of speculative thinking about the future, but in the day-to-day work, if you're not listening to people and working with communities, you're not going to do a good job. But great question. And maybe with that, I do think we're supposed to wrap. So thank you all for coming, and let's thank our speakers here. And I hear there's a lot of great food and beverage over at the exhibit at the Weisman Museum, so we'll see you there.